After his wife's death, this inventor lives alone with his two artificial intelligence androids, but his desire to be with his wife leads him to explore the possibility of bringing her back to life. What's up, Mr. Caveman here. Today we will follow Archive, a film of thriller and scientific fiction released in 2020. So please subscribe and leave a like, and now let's get to the video. The end of this story will leave you completely in shock. We start by seeing scientist George Allmore on a light run toward the engineering station where he lived with his highly advanced robots. And before he arrives, we see one of the androids named J2 cracked in a portrait of Jules Allmore, George's wife. On arrival at his base, George notices J2 informing him about the operation of the infrared on security cameras, and then the two join together to redirect the energy through two leverages, going shortly thereafter to another of their androids named J1. The guy turns on the TV in a Betty Boop drawing to distract the machine while he is doing maintenance on his system, and J2 reveals that he had a dream with George where they were riding a car somewhere unknown, making the guy interested in the details, but he soon ignores it as if he ran away from the subject. He then leaves J1 under the care of J2 and goes to the room to answer a phone call from his wife, ignoring J2, who says that a woman wanted to talk to her, the woman being George's wife. Speaking to her, the guy responds to her call and Jules is not very happy, and in the middle of the conversation she begins to say goodbye to her husband, saying that she loves him, and George seems to already know what that means. When Jules turns off, George starts to get a little hassle seeing himself inside a car next to his wife, and because of this he continues to try to get in touch with the woman, but without success. Later, a woman named Simone starts a meeting with George and already starts pressing the guy, questioning his advances with the prototypes, and ordering him to finish restoring the security system of that unit. Even though George found it unnecessary to focus on it, Simone says it was important because of a group of hackers named Otaku, who tried to counter the company's advances, saying they even captured some of the rebels. The scientist doesn't like it at all, but Simone says the Otaku did the same to some of the company's employees, and could happen to George too, so she would send armed units since she was the new head of internal development at the company. This annoys George since he had no progress in his inventions, and could be disconnected from the company at any time. So he confronts the woman, saying that he had a 3-year contract and that the company could not leave him out of shame. But Simone answers that during all that time, the only progress that the guy had was the creation of the walking refrigerator called J1. And then George questions the woman about the advances she had with her projects, and she shows to be much ahead of the guy as her project had the potential to define the future of robotics for the next 20 years. Simone still insinuates that George's work was nothing more than handmade robotics, throwing in his face that it went well in all the tests carried out, while the man's android didn't even talk, ending the meeting by asking the guy to stop to slack off and soon improve the safety of the place. At that time, J2 says she doesn't like Simone, to which George agrees to say that if she knew that he actually had advanced with his androids, she would be able to dissect the robots and use them for the company. And when he leaves J2, she consoles her sister. Out there, George goes to a machine creation room where he keeps an ambitious design, an even more advanced android called J3, and there we see J2 looking suspicious, showing a certain jealousy of the novice. So folks, given the reality in which we live today, it would not take long for fiction films to come to terms with the creation of robots. The robot Sophia, for example, is an android capable of expressing human characteristics such as empathy, compassion, and creativity. In the hospital area, the Maxi robot was developed to assist medical teams in delivering medicines and supplies and having the ability to work 24 hours a day. The Optimus robot was designed to replace humans on the assembly lines of vehicle companies and even to sell some products. In addition, there is also the Mirai Sanzo, a robot whose function is to automatically control a smart home, integrating functions such as solar panels for the computer, alarms, doors, windows, electronics in general, and everything that can be automated through the electrical grid. Returning to the movie, the man is arranging the security system of the area next to J2 when she puts the guy against the wall, saying that she knew of his plans and that she didn't want to be replaced as J1 was, and still compliments by saying that before they were a team, but that now he had made a better android than her. The conversation leaves George stressed, and he sends J2 back home to not end up getting wet because of the snow. But the machine does not move the foot from there because it doesn't take any rubbish home. After that, George analyzes the operation of the J3 and resolves to turn it on to see how it behaves. But when the android wakes up, she screams desperately as if feeling a lot of pain, which makes George shut down the machine, quickly leaving him rather frustrated but committed to making that project work. The guy sleeps while we see a test recording of the J1 robot in its early stages, where she showed how she could win an egg race with spoons. And shortly afterward, we see J2 enjoying a sound on a vinyl disc as the guy gets up from sleeping for another day of work repairing security towers. When George is leaving to finish the procedure, he notices a dog standing at the entrance door that should not be open. But the guy expels the dog, and only at that time that J1 warned of an error in the system of the house. To do this, the man relies on the help of J2 and reveals to the machine that he intended to review the functioning of his legs to use as a model to build the bottom of the android J3. While repairing the security system of the house's cameras, George realizes that the components have been changed and J2 is accused of sabotaging the device. But the android get out of the line of fire even with George faithfully believing that it was the robot's fault. all. But the scold session ends when the house alerts George that 2 cars are waiting outside. And when George uses the cameras to see who the 2 guys are, they respond by saying they are archive employees acting as delegates, named Vincent and Melvin. Because of this, George runs to hide his robots, because he knows he has people watching his projects. And when the guys enter, the 2 say that they were there to see George's wife, and the guy explains about the problem he was having by calling her, and then Melvin analyzes the system. The curious thing is that the guy inserts a pen drive into the control panel of George's archive model, and stays looking at him as if he is afraid of being caught doing something very wrong. But George suspects him by keeping his eyes open on the delegate. Finishing the suspicious analysis, Melvin reveals to George that the security of that unit had been hacked, but the guy does not believe it since he took care of repairing the security system of the place. The shell also says that the archive device allowed the storage of consciousness and could have simulated conversations on the telephone with the deceased for up to 200 hours. However, if the system was compromised, the company would have to turn off the device and collect what was left of Jules. This angers George, who refuses to allow his wife to be withdrawn from there. And when Melvin threatens to use heavy weapons with his androids under the Post-Death Internation Act, George does not lower his head and says that that was a business territory, and an armed incursion against the entire archive would bring irreversible consequences for them. At that time, Vincent approaches to calm the partner's spirits by saying that it was just a misunderstanding, and George tells the idiots to leave on time. And when they leave, the guy goes to the room of the Android 3 to make sure nothing has been affected. He connects the machine that at first felt confused, but still knew George's name, and argues because of the discomfort of being stuck, but it stops soon when the man threatens to turn it off again. When he tries to touch her, the android reacts suspiciously, causing George to retreat. She then says that she was not happy to be a machine, that she felt the pain to be trapped there, and that she wanted to go home, even George trying to make her sympathize with the place and for him. The day passes, and George tests the ability of J3 to detect flavors, receive information, and feel empathy, even testing virtual reality glasses. And then J2 appears, making J3 question the guy about the android. After the robot leaves, George analyzes the vocality of J3, and there she mentions a dream she had with George, not knowing if it was a dream or a memory, when suddenly J1 appears ashamed to introduce herself to the new sister, and approaches the newcomer, who even tries to greet her without even realizing that she had no arms. Seeing how J1 still relied on George to move, J3 asks when it would be free of those bonds, but the guy answers that he would need a few days as he was busy with other projects. J3 then realizes how different she and her sisters were from each other, and George explains that they were an attempt to a particular goal, saying that the J1 model allowed the creation of J2 until it reached it. Well, it's just a theory, but it is possible that this post-death detention law is related to the storage and management of people's digital consciousness after their deaths. In this world, the transfer of consciousness to synthetic bodies is possible. Therefore, this law should be to establish guidelines on how the consciences can be stored, accessed, and managed after people's completion. In addition, the creation of artificial intelligence is a rather complex process that usually requires knowledge in areas such as programming, data science, machine learning, and software engineering. Since George was born in 2014 and the story takes place in 2038, you can imagine the kind of technology that the guy was in contact with during his growth. The guy was only 6 years old when ChatGPT was launched into the world, so it can be said that he was born right at the beginning of the futurist era. Parallel to this, we see a short dream that George has with his wife, and when he wakes up, the guy goes to J3 and delivers a communicator radio for her to warn him if something happens, and still dispenses J2, who wants to help him fix the system, giving a day off for the machine. At the top of a tower, George is informed by J3 that there was a problem in the base's power circuits, and looking at the horizon, he sees a drone flying over the area and decides to return home soon afterward. Upon returning, the man scans the circuits when J2 appears to want to help, but he gets angry because he ends up losing the count and leaves there to see J3 inquiring about the age of that artisan robotics base. And after that, the man puts J1 to rest, while J2 stares firmly at Jules's picture as if she saw in that picture everything she wants to be. Later, George receives a message from Simone that sends him to the meeting of TAG, a risk assessor who wants to hand him the company's new security protocols. So the man goes with his Lotus Esprit S3 to a cyberpunk city. He encounters TAG at a Japanese restaurant, banking the major for the local androids, even threatening one of them. And then the madman talks about an organization called Black Mesa that he was trying to overthrow. In addition, TAG still tells George that he's being watched because of the progress he has made with his inventions, delivering a photo of the guy sleeping in his room. That angers the man, who questions TAG's involvement in it, but he only delivers a suitcase with the new artisan protocol and says he doesn't know who took the photo, going away soon afterward. We move to the base where we see J2 looking at a visor that was being designed for J3, feeling so much jealousy that she suddenly destroys the object. Meanwhile, we see George in another of his dreams with his wife, where he says that he had been hired to work on a project called Yaminashi, an artificial intelligence research and development initiative aimed at transferring human consciousness to a synthetic body, thus achieving immortality. The problem is that he would have to move to Japan, which did not leave Jewel very happy, but did not prevent her from congratulating her husband husband, and then in the middle of the conversation, a car hood crashes against them, making the guy wake up at the time during an alert of invasion in the house. Even looking for the invader with a cricket bat, George finds no one, but everything gets worse when he discovers that the J3 has disappeared. The guy then opens the suitcase with the security protocol, finding a gun and a screen with tag that had triggered the defenses of the house. The guy stops defending at the request of George, who tries to send drones to scan the area in search of J3, but the house cannot carry out the launch due to a magnetic interference. Thus, George himself goes after the android in the middle of the snow, and as he walks through the forest, he has a daydream with his wife where they talk about the project the guy was working on, where he says that he would only resurrect his wife because he would not be able to live without her. Yet in the daydream, George wakes up seeing Jules disturbed by the idea of dying and being trapped in a metal box, giving up the idea and not wanting her husband to do that anymore. Thus, George promises that he will cancel the idea, something that we have seen that he did not. Back in the snow, the guy manages to send the drones to do the search, but has no advances in finding J3, and then he returns home and still is desperate to see J1 in the middle of the rain, taking the machine inside and warning J2 not to let her out. While looking for some equipment, George opens a compartment from where J3 leaves and wakes up angry with the guy since he had discovered what he did to his own wife, locking her mind in a machine for pure selfishness. So folks, the organization Black Mesa is a reference to the research facility present in the game series Half-Life, being an ultra-secret research complex located in the New Mexico desert where scientific experiments take place in various areas, including theoretical physics, teleportation, and manipulation of alien materials. In this game, the Black Mesa is the main scene where the protagonist works as a scientist, and as the story unfolds, we see the failure of an experiment with an alien material called Ixen, resulting in an invasion of hostile alien creatures in the facility. Back to the movie, calming the spirits of the android, George tells the truth about everything, showing the data that Archive was able to collect based on Jules' remains inside the device, adding that until now there has been no success in inserting such data into an android, as it was different from storing on a hard drive. This is because J3 was not entirely a computer, because its composition still included a certain biochemical element. One day, however, George was able to extract a form of analog signal, trying to re-establish the connection, but without success. In this way, the man took these data and inserted it into a piece of pattern recognition software, and after a year he managed to see Jules and use his advances to create a personality model, finally going to the physical part that became J1, then upgrading it to create J2 and until reaching J3. After telling the whole truth, George asks J3 how she got into the compartment, and she answers that it was J2 who tricked her and put her up there. Angry, George goes to the robot who says it was an accident, but he turns it off as a punishment. We then heard a narration of a conversation between Simone and George, where the woman says that she received a visit from the Archive, who accused the man of breaking a patent because they believed that the guy based his creations on the Archive models. At that time, we see George working on the construction of the bottom of the J3 using the J2 parts. Thus, the operation to bring Jules back to life is carried out, and however incredible it may seem to work. The next day, J3 wakes up with a completely his body, and is much more human than the sisters, so the machine goes to a nearby stream to see its reflection in the water, while George releases J2 from hibernation. Then J2 realizes that her legs have been exchanged for an older pair, ending up suffering exactly what she feared most, being replaced by a better version, so she asks George to leave her alone and goes to her favorite waterfall. However, the house warns of J2's weak battery returning as quickly as she can, but ends up shutting off. As man and machine develop their relationship, with the android even learning to speak French in a day, J1 appears warning George about what happened, and then the guy puts the android to charge, but acts like an idiot telling J2 to go talk to him personally after she ended the drama. In the kitchen, J2 ends up seeing J3 and George dancing with each other, and seeing that the man who created her has still betrayed her and replaced her with another. The J2 gathers their most valuable belongings, says goodbye to his sister, and leaves for a lake where she enters until she disappears. After discovering the disappearance of the android, George searched the entire area behind J2, but did not find the robot, resolving to bury his friend's belongings as a symbolic burial. Because of the memories implanted about Jules, J3 goes to George's bed and lies next to him, but when the guy wakes up, he gets so scared that he ends up telling the android to leave the premises. This leaves her disturbed to the point of causing a failure in her system that causes her to turn off. And there we see a memory that shows that Jules was pregnant when she was finalized in the accident. After the J3's recovery, George searches to find out what had happened to the robot, calling Archive's headquarters to question them about the device's malfunction. An android named Hans Elson responds to the call and reports that he could not help him, but George says that Melvin and Sinclair had gone there exactly to check the device's operation, and Hans answers that there were no visitor records in that unit, and much less employees with those names. Realizing that he was fooled, George receives a call from Simone, who not only sees J3, but also reports that Archive found J2 in the lake and sued the Somnolent Company. The woman starts screaming at George, leaving J3 stressed to the point that she breaks the projector. With emotions running high, George knows they're now going after him and his machines and runs with an axe to sabotage the bridge system and prevent anyone from passing. Meanwhile, Meanwhile, J3 answers a phone call from Jules's conscience stored in the archive device, saying that she will take care of George and that she does not have to worry about her husband anymore. However, George appears questioning what she had said to his wife, but the phone rings again, and George reassures the woman by promising to bring her back before time runs out. At that point, J3 realizes that during all that time, George was creating the machines with the intention of using them as a receptacle for his deceased wife, erasing everything they lived alongside their creator. When George admits all of this, J3 gets angry with the man, and then the house warns them about the archive invasion, with even Simone threatening the guy, and the android takes advantage of the guy's distraction to grab the gun and threaten him by telling him to let his wife go at once. J1 tries to defend its creator from the android, even because his underdeveloped mind is unable to understand the greedy, selfish monster that George has become. So he refuses to give up on Jules, is determined to do everything possible to get his wife back, and who only wants to have a chance to fix things and have a future with the woman he loves. At that time, the archive is almost reaching them, when J3 ends up giving in to George's madness and accepting to give his body to become Jules, and when the operation is finished, the door opens. But George discovers that there is nobody. Surprisingly, J3 survives the transplant by waking up with Jules's consciousness, but before the couple can celebrate, the phone rings again, and Jules asks that the husband not attend. When George meets Jules, he is on the other side of the line, saying goodbye to his husband since the time he had to do the transplant was over, showing that the operation had failed, and that was actually J3. In addition, George hears his own daughter calling him, and thus wife and daughter say goodbye. And then we see the two next to Sinclair, who regrets that George has not been able to bring them back. And so we see that the one who had died in that accident was George, and it was Jules who put up the guy's consciousness in the archive, making all that a mere simulation. And the story ends with Jules and his daughter accepting their fate without him, following a corridor and disappearing forever. Hey guys, would you have your consciences up if you could? Tell me in the comments. Thank you very much for watching. Until next time.